Good morning and welcome to the latest Greater Birmingham Chambers of Commerce webinar entitled 4 Steps to Accelerate Recovery and Growth, today being delivered by 1813 Club Chamber member Prescient Business Consulting. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Gary Birch and I'm Head of Relationship Management at the Chamber. For this morning's presentation, I will introduce you to David Thompson and Jonathan Watt of Prescient Business Consulting. Their presentation will last approximately half an hour, leaving time for questions before we finish at 11:45. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please do add them to the chat box. And if you experience any technical issues, in the first instance, please refer to the Click Meeting troubleshooting platform, or alternatively, please let us know in the chat box and we will try to resolve for you. So, moving on to Chamber support. There has never been a more important time to help local businesses to connect, support and grow. This slide will highlight some of the platforms available through the Chamber of Commerce. Firstly, we have our Greater Birmingham Chamber chat via our Twitter feed. We also have our member marketplace, where members are encouraged to upload offers to raise awareness of their products to fellow members. And we also now have member networking Zoom calls. For these opportunities, please visit the Chamber website and speak with your relationship manager. Examples of support will be our coronavirus hub, which is updated regularly. We have webinars that are both educational and informative, and we have a free legal helpline. We will add the helpline number to the chat box, but that number is 02 921 157 571. From a growth perspective, we have visibility mediums, where again we encourage members to upload blog posts and videos in the current climate to share best practice and offer tips on returning to the workplace safely, as an example. And we also have our daily e-newsletter, which allows businesses the opportunity to raise awareness of their activity to the business community. So from the Chamber's perspective, we'd like to finish just by raising awareness of forthcoming webinars. We do have one more tomorrow, and the others that you can see on the slide are next week and form part of our Global Trade Conference. There will be others on the Chamber website too for your interest. So that's enough from me. We'll move on to the webinar. So 4 steps to accelerate recovery and growth. Can I introduce David Thompson of Prescient Business Consulting? Over to you, David.
Thank you, Gary. Let me ask you a question. If you were granted 3 wishes, what are the 3 things that you would change about your business? Is it more cash, more orders, more time? Well, we're going to look at how to answer that question during this webinar. But obviously it's a high-level webinar. It's a relatively short one, 45 minutes in total. So we can't go into every issue in a huge amount of detail. But we will be doing more webinars over the next few weeks and months, and we'll be doing some one-to-one sessions too. So hopefully we can pick things up then. But let's get back to that question. And it reminds me of an opening conversation I had with an MD of a Scottish distribution business. And he said to me, there's only one thing wrong with our business, and that's that we're under-resourced. Now that was his slightly diplomatic way of saying that he'd run out of cash. But why had he run out of cash? And let me tell you what we found when we actually dug into it. His business was loss-making. He had a very expensive engineering and service department, and he had virtually no sales team. So, unsurprisingly, he'd had no new customers for about 5 years. He had suppliers, some of whom hated them because they hadn't been paid. They had a bank loan which was due for renewal at the end of the next month. And to cap it all, the employees who were dotted in branches, in depots around the country, around the UK, they were blissfully unaware that there was anything at all wrong with the business. So why am I telling you this? Well, it's because the obvious problem with the business, the fact that there was no cash, isn't necessarily the underlying cause. So you could fix the obvious thing by going out and getting a bank loan, a government-backed bank loan, fine. But if you didn't fix the underlying problems, you'd be back in that same situation in, let's say, 6 to 12 months. So what we're going to describe today is the strategy to get through the crisis situation and to secure growth, because that's ultimately, that's what we're trying to do. So I'd be really disappointed if by the end of this webinar, you haven't picked up 2 or 3 really key things, key processes, which you can then use to benefit your business and which we've seen really work in other businesses. If you do get to the end of the webinar and you haven't spotted those things, then please contact us and we can work with you, work with your business to look for some opportunities and give you some positive value. So let's get started and I'll hand over to Jonathan.
Good morning. Thank you, David. Before we start, we would like to put this into context. This is not a seminar on coronavirus business impacts and restart, nor does it ignore the terrible personal and commercial impacts the coronavirus continues to cause. Instead, we look at underlying issues that may have been in the business before coronavirus and will be a drag on performance during and after coronavirus. And by addressing these underlying issues, the business can and will bounce back stronger. A couple more points. I think you may ask if the following insights and process steps are applicable to every business where profitability growth has slowed or has decreased in the last years. The answer is definitively yes. And finally, just before I go into the main section, I ask yourself to throw away your perceptions of a company in distress. We've seen many cases of the frog in the boiling water with good managers. Some of these things are difficult to spot, and they're not bad managers because the paradigm has shifted and things have changed. On the slide, you can see some of the more common adverse business issues. Let me tell you a story rather than go into each one of them. A UK manufacturing client with a broken sales, inventory, operational planning process. It's a bit of a mouthful. It's usually referred to as an S&OP or SIOP for short. This process is at the very heart of most businesses. It's the process that takes the demand, actual, and forecast. It takes the supply constraints and the commitments. It looks at the inventory level. It looks at capacity, and it produces what are we going to do, and a commitment which goes out to the suppliers, but it also goes out to the stakeholders, because this is also underlying this is obviously the financial results. So it's an important process. Most businesses have IT tools behind it, but more than that, it requires solid processes and leadership. So in this project, we found a client having ad hoc SIOP meetings, and yet the process was not working. There were gaps in the data, understanding and processes was leading to wrong decisions. And like any crisis that threatens and here we're talking about that threatens the survival of the business, it's not just one issue. There had been 30 to 40% reduction in sales in the last 3 months on top of a SIOP process that wasn't working. And the reduction was also as a result of a major forecastable external event. So the results, or the situation rather, overstocking, cash crunch, degradation in customer service levels, failed attempt to stop some suppliers' deliveries, leading to legal and stop ship on the goods needed. Also firing of a number of key individuals with no backup plan. So there was a lack of direction and support in the very team that were expected to make the changes. So what was the solution? Well, first of all, we assembled a team that have the expertise and capacity to identify the underlying causes and drive the solutions through the business. We implemented a robust monthly SIOP process with clear rules and leadership. Successfully negotiated postponements of excess orders with 50 suppliers and restart with 15 suppliers who had issued legal letters and stop ship notices. Rebuilding of the ops team supported in the interim and agreed short-term lending solutions. Reduced the excess inventory and committed orders by 75%, reducing liabilities and releasing cash, and achieved a greater than 90% on time in full customer delivery performance within 4 months. I don't say this to impress you. I say this to impress upon you that these issues come at you in pairs, triplets, and grow exponentially in their severity, which of course is the very nature of problems. And where their root causes are not treated and their symptoms are not contained, then this is what will happen. In the last story, cash was a problem, supplier problems, customer problems. These were all symptoms that needed to be, again, they needed to be contained, not forgotten and say, let's keep looking. They needed to be contained. Whereas the broken planning and SIOP process needed to be fixed. That was the root cause. Let me show you by looking at something we're all concerned with, profit. So let me go to the next slide. There we are. Again, what I said was let's look at something called, which we're all concerned about, profit. We've actually done something quite interesting on this slide because we've not just put some theoretical curves and things on here, and this is the normal route businesses follow, but we've also looked at, we've benchmarked, I think, 500 manufacturing businesses in the Midlands. And I've put on the left-hand side here, I've put the distribution of, like a scatter chart, a distribution of where the companies lie on this. You can see that the average is around 6.9%. But obviously there's outliers here and there's outliers which are way below. So it's benchmarking is something we do quite a bit of. However, this picture on the left of where are these companies in terms of profitability at the moment, that's a snapshot. It's important, but the trend is the most important thing, and the underlying issues, as we've said repeatedly over the last few minutes. So a crisis is an event. You see the three crises mentioned here. That's an event or a bundle of issues that threatens the very survival of the business if it continues to be unchecked, of course. The first is a crisis of strategy. You see at the top end of the curve. A little bit more difficult to spot than these other crises, but nevertheless, it's important to get this one under control. What do we mean? It's a problem with the goals of the business and its plans to achieve them in the environment the company operates in. So effectively, the strategy is broken. What could make a strategy and the plans broken? wrong assumptions in the first place, a change in direction from a major customer, competitor, technology, regulatory body, or a major economic event. Of course, change is constant, so strategy plans need to be updated. If I could give you an analogy, an aeronautical analogy. Okay, so I started my career in aerospace, in engineering, before working in 5 other sectors. But it's an interesting analogy. If you think about a pilot with the destination of going from London to New York, and they start with a flight plan. Flight plan has got the departure time, direction, altitude, speed, traffic, fuel burn, loading, passengers, staffing, and arrival time. The pilot is constantly, with the help of some tech, refining direction based on feedback on where they are, rather. Even though they know the plan will change when they get to 30,000 feet, they don't take off without a plan. I just wanted to emphasize that we need to do the planning, even though we understand that it's going to change. That's the main point from there. Back to the slide. So if we go further down the curve where businesses may find themselves due to missing the strategy crisis clues, and we see sales start to stagnate and decline, profit soon follows. Of course, you can and should starve off the effect. How? By cutting costs in the right areas. But even that's a temporary measure. If profitability goes, then cash will soon drain away, and your options start to diminish rapidly as you go further down this curve. But I don't want to do a doom and gloom scenario here. It's not the only route. As you can see, the trend can be reversed with new thinking and actions. Let's look at how this can be done to support a business bouncing back. David, would you like to cover a few of the points on the uptrends?
Yes, thank you, Jonathan. So in 1950, the New York Times quoted Einstein, and let's face it, it's always great to quote Einstein in a business presentation. But Einstein said, everything should be made as simple as possible, but no simpler. Now, Einstein was talking about science, but actually it fits business just as well. And what we saw from Jonathan's slides were, there are an awful lot of aspects to any business, and they're all linked. So it isn't that simple. But what we've done is we feel that we can simplify our approach, and that's our approach to forming that upward trend. So at Prescient, we worked with businesses, some very small businesses, but some large multinational businesses. And we've developed a phased approach, which looks at where the business is and then how to turn it around and how to push it back up onto the upslope of that curve. And we find that these techniques, if you work through them in series, they really work. So the 4 stages, the diagnostics is basically saying to you, where are you on that curve and why? The objective is facts and not emotion. And that's really important because, I've been into a business and I spoke to one person and they said, look, this business has 1 month of life left in it because of its cash. I spoke to someone else and they said, look, it's a great business. There's really nothing wrong with it. You just need to make a few phone calls to the right people and it'll be sorted out. Now, both of those people were 100% passionately believing what they said. But actually, they were both wrong. And the thing was that they were so close to the business that they couldn't see it. They had emotion, they hadn't got the facts, and they were embedded in the business. So it often helps to have an outside view to be able to give you that objectivity. So the next stage is stabilization, and this is really dealing with the urgent issues. So as Jonathan said, you've got some things which absolutely have to be handled. They might be symptoms, they might be causes, but they might be the symptoms. They still need to be dealt with urgently. And then you need to make the plan that is actually going to turn the business around and change the direction of the business. That's the rebound part of it. And part of these stages, the crisis stabilization and the rebound, is the story, creating a story. And that story needs to be simple, but it needs to be real. It doesn't need to be a fairy story, but it needs to be real, because what you're going to do with that story is you're going to convince various groups of stakeholders, and I'll talk about that in a minute, of how the business is going to recover, where it's going to go after that. And that's absolutely essential. So the story part of it is crucial. And then the final stage is growth. Now, growth may seem a long way away at this particular point, but actually that's what investors want to see, that's what employees want to see, customers, it's what you want to see. So this is all about growth, it's not about survival. So let's have a look at the first phase, the diagnostics. How did we get here? And where actually is here? That's kind of where you're starting from. And as I said before, emotions, opinions, assumptions, they need to be cleared out of the way. You start with the things that you can really put your hand on. So you got your financial statements, you got your profit and loss, your balance sheet, and your cash flow reports. Great, except that they're all backward looking. They've told you where you have been, they've told you where you are now. The really important documents are those forward forecasts that show you where you're going, particularly the cash flow forecast.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the critical thing about funders when you're looking at external funding is that they often are said to lend in the rear view mirror. So they'll look at the past performance of the business, and they don't really look so much at especially debt funders. They won't look at the forward view so much. Now, you have to look at the forward view. You have to be able to explain the past, but you really need to look at the forward view. And this is where scenario planning is so important. And a lot of businesses either don't do scenario planning at all, or they don't do it very much, or possibly worse than that, they think they do it, but they actually ignore the really bad stuff, because that's really scary. So scenario planning can be scary, but you have to do it. What happens if that customer payment doesn't come in on time? What happens if you can't delay that supplier payment? All of those things need to be thought about. You need a plan. Now, data is obviously vital in the diagnostic phase, but people are a very large part of the business. And that's not just your employees, that's all of your stakeholders. So who are the stakeholders? Well, you've got suppliers, customers, employees, banks, shareholders, HMRC, regulators, a whole load of people who have an influence on your business. And the analysis that you go through at this stage is saying, what is that influence? So you're asking yourself different questions about them. Well, what happens if that group of stakeholders suddenly becomes hostile to my business? They suddenly decide that the supplier is going to shorten your credit terms, for instance. But you could look the other way and say, well, what could I actually get out of that group of stakeholders? If they're customers, could they give you a payment up front? They might even want to invest in the business. I've seen that before. And we'll come to talk about exactly how you handle those stakeholders, but a lot of this is about communication, but it starts with understanding. I mean, in pressing, we often talk about think differently, act differently, be different. The thinking differently is about getting into the minds of the groups of stakeholders. What are they after? What's in it for them? It's a bit like the old sales thing. What's in it for them? So you've got your facts. Now you can start to plan and stabilize. Now we call this crisis stabilization. You might be sitting there thinking, well, my business isn't actually in a crisis. And just remember Jonathan's expression, throw away your preconceptions about a business in distress. Really what we're talking about is any business that's on, if you like, the wrong side of that curve. It could be at the top of the curve, could be at the bottom. What we want to do in the stabilization phase is start that process of turning it back up. And the critical things in the stabilization phase are speed and focus. Focus is very important. Don't let yourself get diverted. Cash is going to be the fundamental in this stage. So you need a daily forecast. This is a very detailed forecast by day, maximum by week. You need to look at it every day. Now, you might find that your finance department or your accountant, whoever it is that looks after the finance, says, oh, that's a lot of work, that's too difficult. You have to insist, you really do, because it's essential, it's your Bible, and the rest of the people in your business and all of the other stakeholders will thank you for that effort and thank your finance people for that effort. The cash forecast will also drive your external funding requirements. And you have to do it objectively. This is another very important point throughout the whole of this. You have to be objective. You have to be honest with yourself. You know, you might look at this and you don't want to admit that your business is perhaps not performing the way you want to. Well, you know, you might do because, of course, it might be to do with COVID-19, and it's not your fault. But you have to be honest with where you are, and then you can come up with your external funding requirements. And then the stakeholder plan, which, as I said before, this is vital because it's the thing that you're going to keep repeating in slightly different formats for different groups of stakeholders. You know, if you're talking to your bank, you might talk differently than if you're talking to the shop floor or talking to your sales force, whatever. It needs to be slightly tailored, but it's the same message, the same simple message. And people will get bored of you talking about it. Keep going, keep talking about it. And it's essentially saying, where are you? How did you get here? What are you doing? Where are you going? It's very simple. Now, a very important group of stakeholders is your employee group, the people within your business. Unfortunately, in a lot of these situations, the organization needs to be reduced, and that means letting people go. And that's a hugely difficult thing for any business owner and any manager to do. It's probably the most difficult thing. But the way to do it is really just to be very, very quick, very open, and sort of very transparent about it. Our colleague Kate Marsh, who looks after the HR and the culture side of our business, she's excellent at the very difficult balance between a sympathetic and a professional approach, and that's the way that you have to do it. You have to think about the employee, but you have to do things properly and professionally. And actually, you know, people appreciate being treated with respect, and that's what it's about in that process. It's about respect. So now you can set your plan and you can assemble your team. Now, important point about the team: they have to have experience, they have to have expertise, and they have to have capacity. You know, that's important. They have to have the capacity to be able to do this and not be pulled off and doing other things and not being able to focus. So that might mean that you have to have people from outside your business to help you for certain specific areas or certain specific bits of expertise. So once we've stabilized the business, Then we're on to rebound. So that's we've come to the bottom of that curve and we're starting to trend up. And I'll give you the analogy of which you've probably heard, about the 10-year-olds football team. So you give everybody their position, then they see the ball, and everybody goes to the ball. What you need with this plan, and I'm not going to go through every element of that plan, but you need balance and you need coordination and you need communication. And again, it comes back to that message again, that story. Effectively, you need to lead. That's what we're talking about. It's leadership in that situation so that people all move together. They're behind you. They know where you're going. They know where the business is going. And coming back to the thinking differently bit, you need to understand what all of those different functions and groups of people, what they're feeling, what their risks are, what they're worried about. But they need to understand things about the other functions too. So the salespeople need to understand what's going on in supply chain and vice versa. That's one of the really negative things that I've seen in almost all businesses, that when you get into any kind of a tough situation, everybody in the management team knows how to do everybody else's jobs better than they do. But actually, they don't. You need everybody to focus on their own jobs, and that's how you get a proper team. And this comes into the external funding bit particularly, and this is how we first started working with our associate David Jackson, who's our funding expert. That understanding the motivation of the funding community and what they're looking for is essential, and that's often something that when you're in a business, you don't quite recognize what their view, their perspective of what they're looking for. So when you're pitching for funding, it must be from their point of view. What are they looking for? Why should they invest their money in your business? And lastly, I think on this slide, it's back to the football bit. After you've scored a goal, and maybe this depends which football team you support. After you've scored a goal, we've all seen it. Everybody relaxes, and the opposition score almost immediately. It's that sort of, phew, we've done it syndrome, and that can often be the case after you've got funding. So resist that tendency. Don't relax. Keep the focus. And now you're ready for growth. Now let me hand back to Jonathan to talk about that phase.
Thank you, David. Ready for growth. Yes, the objective here is not just to survive, but also to grow and get the altitude so the business is not just 500 feet above an obstacle when it arises next, but 5,000 feet or even 30,000 feet. So what else can we do to increase the rate of climb and the overall altitude? First, secure high efficiency in your operations and supply chain with cost reductions and process improvements. The global crisis has put us in a buyer's market, so conditions are perfect for gaining significant economies in sourcing. There's no better time now to realign these supplier relationships for long-term improvements. So with strong growth plans and a clear narrative, and you're going to see your suppliers by prioritizing them, you can get 3, 5, 10, 20% cost reductions. Could be possible. In external spend, that would go straight to the bottom line. Don't miss this opportunity. Or as a coach once said to me, opportunities don't disappear, they go to somebody else. So really grasp this one now. Next, drive profitable demand creation through your marketing and sales activities. I think we've touched on that earlier, but it's even more important in this. The business has got the appetite for growth and the capabilities, and you need to feed it. Precise your target market. Consistently and effectively communicate to them through both online and offline channels. Don't be a Luddite and stick to offline. You've got to grasp digital marketing and make it work for you. And then with clear, compelling messages about benefits, for your products and services. Take the last stage, obviously converting all of this to sales. Take some of the risk away from the buyer that may be holding them back, and obviously consistently deliver value. Other areas we've got here on the slide: communicate and work with the stakeholders. We've mentioned this. Secure an additional funding, so you don't stop communicating and working with the stakeholders when you go into this phase, because gaps will appear and disconnects. Invest in new product development with that the market demands. Scale the organization with new talent and maintain training development in areas of needs. Again, funding will certainly be needed. We've covered that. Consider a moment. Yeah. I think what I'd like to, we've talked quite a bit about planning and strategy, and I know some people find it quite conceptual. You imagine if I took a mug of iron filings and poured them on a piece of card. The iron filings would scatter everywhere, and they'd all be pointing in different directions, obviously. Now imagine if you took a magnet underneath the card in the direction you want them to be pointing. The strategy and the plans are the magnet. And that's how you align the business. I think at this point it would be useful if we could get a little bit of feedback from the audience before Q&A. And Gary or Grace, could you support with a survey, please, at this point? If everybody could look at these areas which we've taken out of the key areas in the presentation, and which we see as crucial, but we would like really for you to select which of these areas would have the most value in your business. I'll give you a minute or so. So again, we've got the funding, the strategy, profit improvement. The profit improvement in this context, it includes both the cost side, which, for example, we talked about a little bit about cost reductions with suppliers, but profit improvement also includes looking on the sales side as well. Increasing demand, profitable demand. Getting rid of some of those accounts which are unprofitable, or those product lines. So it's both sides. So I just wanted to make sure that that was clear, because we did split them up in certain parts of the presentation. Stakeholder management, I think that's clear. We've really emphasized that. And management operating systems and culture. That really pulls the point about the strategy, the other planning systems like the PSYOP, but also how those are embedded in the organization, and how the culture, how the organization adopts a performance-led culture, a results-orientated. Okay. Thank you. Excellent. Very interesting. Okay. Very interesting.
What was the result, Jonathan?
External funding is leading, with management operating systems and culture second, and profit improvement programs third, and stakeholder management coming in last. These are all important, obviously.
I'm just conscious of time.
Yes. Should we open it up to some questions?
Yeah.
And then we just make some closing remarks at the end.
Hi, both. Yep. Thank you, David, Jonathan. Very, very insightful. I can see we've had our first question in. I think it came in from Paul Holding. So Paul is asking, what suggestions do you have for building a robust marketing plan? Everybody says to use LinkedIn, but this feels like putting a message in a bottle and hoping someone reads it. And hoping someone reads it. So, thoughts on that one?
I mean, I think,
David?
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. Yeah.
Yes, Paul. I think it has to start with being very precise on your target market, and very, very precise. So if LinkedIn in this instance reaches out, or is the best opportunity to work with to identify and reach your target market, then LinkedIn is a useful tool. But you have to, so the first point again, target market. Second is getting a message which resonates with that target market. Further point, it's interesting, a statistic I was reading last week. Most senior business people get between 100 to 200 emails a day, and they get between 7 to 10 LinkedIn messages per week. Just think about that. I could spend a lot longer on this question. It's something which fascinates me in terms of the best way of reaching a target market. Look at where your target market go. But I think I'll leave it there. And Paul, I'm happy to look at your marketing plans in more detail offline. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thank you, Paul. Hope that helps. Just seeing if we've got any more questions to come through. Oh.
Okay.
Right, so another question from Gillian Moore. What sectors of business are you most familiar with? Jonathan?
Jonathan,
you start this, and I'll add anything that you think I might have missed, but I'm sure you'll be comprehensive on this.
Yeah, I mean, the sectors that we've been involved with over a long period of time are automotive, energy and utilities, aerospace, rail industry, retail, and distribution. I think they're some of the key areas. Jonathan, I don't know if you've. I think I've.
No, tech. I would also add to that.
Ones.
And tech, I would also add to that, and I also refer to my one of my opening statements is that this is applicable to any business in that type of situation, in that type of profit degrading situation.
Yeah, I think that is actually very true. That the kind of techniques that you can use are similar. Obviously, you've got different dynamics, but it's but most businesses have very similar ultimate drivers. Thanks for the question, Gillian. It's
yes, thank you.
Great, right, thank you. I'm just conscious of time, so thank you to David and Jonathan of Prescient Business Consulting. Thanks to all attendees for joining the webinar. I hope it was insightful and informative for you. The recording will be added to our YouTube link and should be available early next week. And I also know that our events team will follow up with all attendees with an email to send through the details. So should you want to pick up further conversations offline directly with Prescient, then you'll have the relevant contact details for David, Jonathan, and colleagues Kate and David too. So hope that's okay with everybody. Thanks again, Jonathan and David. Keep well, everyone, and hope to see you on future webinars hosted by the Chamber. Take care. Bye-bye.
Yes, thank you, Gary.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.